And we are live.
Wow.
Hi, Al.
Are you are you down in a subway somewhere? You got a
No,
subway
I'm
sign
actually,
behind you. My
it's a good
goodness.
sign.
It's
Thank you
not
for that
safe
sign.
there in New York these days. You got to be
Yeah,
careful.
okay. I want to welcome everyone that's joining us to Inspired Learning. I'm your host, Dr. Gina Marcello, and I have the honor and the pleasure to have on as today's guest, Al Dukes.
Oh, hi there.
Oh, hi there, Al.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. As you know,
Oh,
this
yeah.
is part of a course that I'm teaching at Rutgers University, digital media production. And I thought it would be great to bring in some producers to talk to the students. And I figured while I do that, why not invite more people? You have such a wealth of knowledge, as did Tom Izzo, and I have Marlo coming in, and another friend, Robin, coming on to talk about what it's like to be a producer. The inside knowledge that you have is really, I just can't wait to get going with our interview, Al.
All right. Well, let's get to it then.
Okay. So, for those that don't know, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got started in radio?
All right. I am the producer for Boomer and Gio, the morning show at WFAN. Been there for we just started. I just started my 14th year there doing that job. Prior to that, I've been with this company for since 2001. Before that, I produced sports talk shows in Tampa, worked at WNEW and 92.3 K-Rock, doing shows that were more entertainment, as they would say, guy talk shows. So, yeah, that's what I do.
So, when you were at K Rock, who did you work with? Who did
I
you
worked with
produce?
I worked with Booker, who did afternoons when Howard Stern was on in the morning there.
And you also worked with David Lee Roth for a little bit, right?
I worked with David Lee Roth for a short time. As you know, he was replacing Howard Stern, which is not an easy thing to do.
Hmm.
So no surprise that there was some chaos involved there.
And then how did you end up at Boomer and Geo?
Well, I was working at K Rock at the time, or maybe I was working. No, I went from K Rock back to. Maybe I was at K Rock.
You don't even
I'm not
remember,
sure.
Al?
I don't remember. I just know that Boomer and Carton were going to start up on WFAN. Mark Chernoff, who was working at K Rock and at WFAN at the same time, I knew him. I worked with him. I worked with Chris Olivero in the past, who was putting the show together. And they thought, well, I should meet with a Boomer and Carton and see if that would be a match, and it was. So that's how I ended up going over there.
Okay, so we know how you got to first Boomer and Carton and now Boomer and Geo, but let's go back a little further. When you went to graduate school and you wrote your master's degree about radio because you've always been very interested in radio, did you ever think that you would have ended up on the number one sports talk radio show in the country?
Well, I think the goal was to get to back to New York City and to be on. I wanted to be on a show that was similar to Howard Stern, not in the at the time Howard Stern was known for like strippers and porn stars, which was unfair because it really was a show that talked about topical things, everyday things, guys busting each other's chops, that sort of thing. But I mean, it was his fault. That was the way he promoted himself whenever he would go to do promotion. It was strippers and porn stars and that sort of thing. It really was not that type of show. I just love the idea of a show where it seemed like guys were hanging out, talking about their everyday lives, talking about things going on in the news. So that was the goal, to get to something like that. And I never saw myself as a guy that could be the lead host in something like that. But I didn't think, oh, I could be Howard Stern. That seemed impossible to me. But I thought, well, I could be one of those guys that works on a show with a guy like a Howard Stern. So that's what I was gunning for when I got interested in radio.
And then you went down to Florida and you started at a small station down in Florida first. And
Yeah, go ahead.
no, I just think it's important for students to understand if they're interested in breaking into the business. A lot of
Yeah.
times, you have to start off in the smaller markets.
Yeah, I mean, there are two approaches. You can start off in the largest market, New York City. You do not make a lot of money, and I think it's harder to move up because sometimes when you get into a place, people see you as what you come in as. So if you come in as a lower level person, sometimes that's how you're viewed at the station, especially if you don't really do anything yourself to set yourself apart from everybody else. The other way is to start in a smaller market, get a lot of experience, and then be able to come to New York. I had 7 years experience at that time when I got back to New York. I was in Tampa, Florida for 7 years. So at the time it was, I think, the 21st market size. But I didn't make a lot of money down there either. The difference was that making a little money in Florida, I was still able to have my own apartment. I was still able to go out to dinner. I was still able to buy my groceries. And
Right.
I'm not sure making that money in New York City, I would have been able to do that. So a lot of times, guys that men and women who start off in New York City end up having to get apartments together where there's like four of them living in one place. It's getting other jobs to kind of supplement the income because it does not pay a lot when you first get started.
So would it be fair to say that you are really and have always been just very passionate about radio itself and primarily become because of Howard Stern?
Yeah, I would say I've been passionate about talk radio, and specifically the beginning parts were because of Howard Stern. Yes, but
Okay.
then as I worked in the business more, I started, in the beginning, when you like Howard Stern, he teaches you to hate everybody else. He's the only one who's good. He's the only one who's interesting. He's the only one. Everybody else is ripping him off. I was definitely one of those people. But then once I got to WNEW, I got to do some work with Opie and Anthony and Ron and Fez. And you start seeing, hey, there are some other very creative, very funny people in talk radio.
I'm glad that you said that because my next question to you is what makes a great sport talk show, in your opinion?
Well, I always think there's different levels, right? So I think it's very difficult for somebody to be able to talk for 4 hours today and then talk for 4 hours tomorrow and then talk for 4 hours the next day. It's not easy. It might be easier on Monday during football season when you have the football games to talk about, you have baseballs going on right now. Like right now, because of coronavirus, there's uh, playoffs going on in basketball, football. We're on the verge of baseball playoffs, and the NFL just kicked off. So there's a ton of sports to talk about. But can you do that when there's not a ton of sports to talk about? When there's not a huge game that was played last night?
Mhm.
So I think there is a certain skill set where people are able to talk sometimes to themselves for 4 hours. Now, that does not necessarily make a good talk show host. It makes you able to do the job, and I don't think I can do that part, right? So I don't think I could do 4 hours by myself. I don't think I could do that. So there are people that can do that, but you need the next piece, which is something that separates you from all the people that can just be able to do the 4 hours part. What makes you interesting, intriguing? What makes it so that when someone is watching the game on Sunday, they go and the Jets make a boneheaded move on the field, they go, oh, I can't wait to hear Boomer and Gio's take on that in the morning. Or Joe Beningo, who lives and dies with the Jets. Oh, I'm going to be tuned in when Joe comes on at 2 o'clock because he's going to be furious at what the Jets did. That's the difference in being somebody who can just talk sports and being somebody that people need to know what you're going to say on the topic.
Well, I think it would be fair to say not only do you produce the show, but you're part of the show and you've been part of the show for many years now. And you're also on air because about a month ago,
Yes,
you and Jerry you have your own on air spot from 5 to 6.
5 a.m. to 6 a.m. prime time. Wake up early and tune it in. Listen, there's a lot of people on the road when we're not in coronavirus world from 5 to 6 a.m. So there are people out there. All you have to do is listen to the traffic reports, and the traffic person will be like, "Oh, it's an hour wait for the George Washington Bridge." Like it's 5:15 in the morning. So those are our people. Those stuck in cars.
All right, so let me ask you this question.
All right.
What makes a good radio host?
Well, I think those things I outlined for you there. Somebody who can not only talk for 4 hours, but uh, is somebody that uh, you are drawn to, that can do things other than talk sports, right? So we're at a time now where I think sports talk in general has changed over the years. It used to be that the sports talk host had all of the information and you didn't have the information, right? You as a listener. But now you have you, the person listening to the talk show has as much information as the person doing the talk show. So it's no longer good enough to know that the Yankees won last night because of this guy hit a home run and this guy's on base percentage. Everyone could get that information if they want. Now
Mhm.
you have to bring that story to life and make it so that we care about it with more than just the facts. So, what is your opinion? What is your strong opinion? We should know when we're listening that, Boomer thinks the Jets played terrible last night because of these reasons.
So a good sports talk show host needs to be
Yeah.
to have a strong point of view, one way or the
Yes.
other.
Yes. You have to have a strong point of view. You have to be able to make your argument. Um, I don't know. You have to have. It's hard to explain because certain people have it and certain people don't. Howard Stern has it, right? So Mike and the Mad Dog had it, right? They did it for 21 years. There's something special about that person in the medium of radio to do 4 hours on it every day, and it's hard to explain. But you can tell when somebody has it or somebody doesn't have it.
Is
It's
it
one of those things.
about almost being self-deprecating, being totally open and honest?
Sometimes and sometimes not. I mean, that's the route I like to go. I like the self-deprecating, the open and honest part. You know, if I didn't see the Yankee game last night and Jerry says, "Did you even watch the game?" I'm going to say, "No, I fell asleep." There are other people who don't want to be questioned on their authority to that they saw the game. So it goes different ways. There's some people who, there's the self-deprecating fun route, and there's the arrogant, I know everything more than you route. That's also very effective for a talk show host.
Let's just talk about radio itself, the difference between morning drive, midday, and afternoon drive. Do you think you have a different audience in the morning on morning drive than you do in the afternoon? And if
Yeah,
so,
I think your morning drive and your afternoon drive are similar, right? So, morning drive, I think it's important to really, one of the things like we say that all the audience has all the information that you have, right? Because we have Twitter, we have the internet. But for most people, in the morning, they get up at the last possible minute that they could get up. They hop in the shower, brush their teeth, grab their coffee, get in the car, boom, turn on the radio. They may not even know who won the game last night, right? So that you're their first place where they can hear what happened and hear opinions on the game. Middays to me has always been the toughest because by 10 a.m. it feels like it's old news by now, but that may just be because I've sat through 4 hours of it. But
5.
5 hours of it, right? But so to me, middays always feels stale. It feels like I knew this already. Then by 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, the news that we'll talk about in the morning, the next morning, is starting to happen during the afternoon show. So the afternoon show gets more breaking news. It's very rare that we get breaking news in the morning.
Mhm.
So oftentimes we don't get to react to breaking news. People players get fired and suspended and all these things. That happens in the afternoon. It doesn't happen generally in the morning. Big trades happen in the afternoon. So I think the difference is in the morning, you're probably the first voice people are hearing about the game, especially if they fell asleep the night before. Middays, while great hours to work and a great lifestyle to have, you could get up later than normal. You can go to bed later than normal. I think it's the toughest time of day to do a show because it's hard and you got to keep the topics fresh from the morning. And then afternoons are more previewing what's going to go on later that night in sports and anything breaking.
Okay. So it's interesting because I don't know that a lot of people have really thought about the different time slots in radio. They're not involved in radio and how they do
Yeah.
differ. If you were a student and you really desired either to produce a show or to host a show, what advice would you give the student? What do they do to get better at being able to talk to themselves for 4 hours?
Well, that I think is where you can start doing a podcast for yourself. Probably no one will be listening to it, but you'll be getting the experience of sitting there and talking to yourself for 15 minutes and do that for a little while, then do a 30-minute show by yourself then an hour, that sort of thing. And then you can start to, it's no different than going to the gym. You're not going to decide, I want to be a power lifter. I want to be a talk show host. I want to be a power lifter. I'm going to go in the gym and rack 500 pounds on the bench press and put it up 10 times. No way. You go in there the first couple of days, you're just going to put the bar with no weights on it, right? And just to get the feeling, how does that feel? So I think repetition. I think internships are always great if you want to be a producer. Start following what other producers do. Follow them on Twitter. See if you listen to the show, do they contribute to the show on the air? Is it completely behind the scenes? Just start observing what they do and try to get yourself into a place where you want to work through an internship, or some places have volunteers, not a lot anymore, because I guess it goes against, like insurance coverage. If you trip and fall in the place and you're not a paid employee. So it's difficult. It's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not. And I think that's important for students to know off the bat as they're going through their classes and they're thinking about this. So one of the things that you mentioned, and actually one of the assignments I have for the students, is editing and producing their own podcast. And a lot of people have podcasts right now. You have one that you do every day with Jerry, but you also had another podcast. Can you just talk about first the podcasts that you did and that you do, and what do you think is going on with podcasting right now?
Podcasting, to me, it's like the Wild West right now. It's like a few years ago how blogs were. Everybody had a blog, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody now has a podcast because it's very accessible to be able to do a podcast, for it to sound great. It's like it used to be difficult for a rock band or any band to get into a studio to record music, to give it to people who could hear it and give them a record deal. Now anybody can make a really great sounding rock and roll song without even knowing how to play instruments. If you're just really good at GarageBand, so it's that way with podcasts too. Anybody can set up and do a podcast. The difficult thing is getting someone else other than your one or two friends to listen to your podcast, right?
So how do you...
I will tell you this. I got my buddies don't even listen to my podcast.
My those buddies be Mike Eccles.
No, yeah, but
Steve, John, who could it be?
Steve never listened to my podcast. John did, and I did my podcast with Paul. Those are all my friends. So it's just very difficult to get listeners. The only way that I can think of now to get listeners, you can't just hang out with your friends and talk sports. There's a million people doing that, or hang out with your friends and talk blank. You've at this point got to get so niche, so specific to be able to get some people to listen to you. Because right now, if I go to iTunes, which is the most popular place to get podcasts, or Spotify, and I type in sports, oh my gosh, it's probably 50,000 podcasts. And that's not an exaggeration. No. But if I was going to start a pod, and the only reason why I have listeners to my podcast is I'm on WFAN. So I'm a known entity to some people already.
Right. So the station actually came to you and Jerry, or to everybody, and said, we're interested in podcasts a number of years ago. Is that how the...
Yeah, at the end of 2014, the company, then CBS Radio, we're now Entercom, purchased the stations from CBS Radio. But back then we were CBS Radio. And they said, listen, we want to start doing podcasts, and we don't want to use specifically the talent that's on the air already. They're already on the air, but are there people behind the scenes? Are there producers that have an idea for a podcast that you'd be interested in? Because we'd be interested in hosting it and promoting it. So at the time I thought, well, me and Jerry could do a podcast because we're known entities on WFAN, but we don't have our own show. And then I wanted to do an interview podcast where I interviewed people that had jobs similar to mine to find out, how did you get this job? What was next? What came after that?
It's a great resource for students, and it's still available. Yeah. Can you tell everyone the name of that podcast?
Yes, I titled it Al's Boring Podcast.
Okay,
because I thought there were so many podcasts out there, and they're all boring. So I just called mine Al's Boring Podcast. But what I did was I interviewed people probably for 45 minutes to an hour, people that I thought had a good story in the business. but eventually ran out of people that either I was interested in talking about, or then people that I wanted to talk to were not interested in talking to me.
One of my
So
favorite interviews,
yeah,
actually, two of them. The one that you did with Mark Chernoff was an excellent interview, and the
that
one
was a
that
two-parter.
right, two parts, and the one you did with Kim Jones was excellent, especially for
Right.
those that are listening that are women that are interested in sports talk
Yes.
or sports broadcasting. So I
Yes.
highly recommend to go back and look for that in the iTunes, or is it on Spotify too?
It's not on.
Mm,
Yeah, that one is on Spotify.
okay.
Al's Boring Podcast. If you just Google Al's Boring Podcast, that many different links pop up, so you can find it.
And then your podcast that you do with Jerry, you do that one every day. So that's a 5 day
Yeah.
a week podcast. It runs about 30, 40 minutes.
Well, what we do now is we do probably 20 minutes, and then we tack on our hour-long warm-up show that's on WFAN for people that weren't up at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Got it. Oh, I have a question here from a student.
Oh,
Let me pull it up. We've got a couple of questions. This is from Justin. Do you think that there's value in doing a podcast for the sake of doing one initially and not worrying about the downloads and audience size just as yet? Could that still prove to be valuable to potential employers just so they can hear your voice and tone? That's a
yes.
great question,
That
Justin.
is a great question. Yes, I think right now, if you were to start a podcast, I would assume 0 people are going to download it. That's just the truth. And if you have 1 or 2, it was probably you who downloaded it to listen to yourself. But I think it's great for repetitions, like I said, as if you were going to go to the gym and do bench presses, so that one day you could bench press 500 pounds. I also think that's a great idea, which I had not actually thought of, because the people you're sending audio to for jobs, they don't know how many downloads you have. They can't tell by that, but they can hear your voice. They can hear you acting like a talk show host. So yes, I would do that. That's a very good question. What's his name? Justin?
Justin. And
Good
he
job.
said, hey, that counts. So great. Thanks.
Hey, Justin.
Thanks for the question. And just one last thing with the podcast. Do you think that people who put podcasts out there are honest about how many downloads they have?
No, I do not.
You don't. Why?
No, because all it takes is a couple people to inflate their podcast numbers. And then if you tell the truth about your podcast numbers, you look like you stink.
Right. And there's no way for anyone to know.
There's a way for the people that publish the podcast. They know how many people are downloading it, but they don't want to tell the truth. I see things all the time. I see like so-and-so was reported 5 million downloads for June. No chance. I'm sorry. You didn't have 5 million downloads in June. You didn't.
So always so happy, Al.
I hate fake things. Like, you know what? Screen grab then the back end where you're showing 5 million downloads and tweet that out.
Yep.
Also, if you wanted to do a popular podcast, try to get Barstool to take it. They seem to have that on lockdown.
They do.
They know what they're doing with podcasts.
They rock when it comes to sports communication, man.
Yeah,
they've got it.
Not even just sports communication. It's podcasting. Like
podcasting, yes.
They know what they're doing over there. So if you could try to get a podcast on Barstool, that would really do wonders for you.
There you go. So now we're going to go from podcasting into just radio itself. So radio has seen a lot of changes, especially over the past 15 years with all of the streaming. What is your opinion on where radio will be in the next 5 years?
That is a good question. Well, radio got into the, like Entercom has radio.com. So they have all their radio stations on an app so that you can listen to radio stations and radio programs on demand the same way that you would listen to a podcast on demand. I don't know. I think, I've always been focused for radio on talk radio and for most of my career on sports talk. And to me, I don't have a fear of that going away because sports talk is local, right? So for the most part, people in this area like the Yankees and the Mets and would not tolerate a 20-minute discussion on the Milwaukee Brewers. No one cares around here, right? So that's why I think sports radio is a great local thing that's not going to go away. So, and I think it'd be great for more radio stations to be in the talk genre because I think that's something you can't really get anywhere else.
Right, but there's only two types of talk right now: political
There's only
talk
two types.
or
Yeah,
sports talk, right?
political talk or sports talk. Yeah.
They need
The
another form of talk or different forms of talk, I think.
yeah, what we used to refer to as guy talk.
Or gal
Hot.
talk.
Well, it was called guy talk. It was or hot talk or entertainment talk.
Hot
But
guy
those were
talk.
kind of they were kind of like the Howard Stern, Opie and Anthony's, that sort of thing. But you know, in the world we're in right now, which is what they call cancel culture, where if somebody hears something that doesn't sound PC, they get you canceled immediately. Now is not the time to launch such a thing.
Right. Good point.
Yeah.
All right, so getting into the past now. What is your favorite radio memory? Favorite thing that's happened on radio or off radio since you've been producing?
Since I've been in the business,
Yeah, since then you've been in the biz.
hmm, that's a good question. I was going to say my favorite radio memory as a listener or as somebody working in the
Someone
industry.
working in the industry, something shocking or surprising or just so funny that
Um, my favorite radio memory for me was during Boomer and Carton. Craig was making fun of Jerry Seinfeld had a show on NBC after the Seinfeld series, which is arguably the greatest show ever on television.
I think
Normally, when they do lists, it comes out
yep,
on top. It's like number
always.
one. So Jerry Seinfeld, clearly a hugely successful man, and had a show on NBC for a little while called The Marriage Ref. I don't even remember it. It was not very good.
No.
So Craig on the air one day was just busting chops, saying how terrible the marriage ref is, and blah blah blah. And they're like, "You should get Jerry Seinfeld to call in." So on the microphone on the air, I go, "Oh, Jerry, if you're listening, you could call in," jokingly. And then the phone rang, and it was Jerry Seinfeld. He's like, "Let me talk to him." So that is the great thing about radio is you never know who's listening, especially in like Los Angeles or New York City where their celebrities live. You never know who's listening. And unlike a podcast, which isn't live, someone can be reactive and call in. So if Seinfeld heard that on a podcast that we did, he'd have to find a way to reach out to us, and by the time he did, he'd probably forget about it. But if
Right.
there was some way you could call in right away, that's what's great about radio. I remember as a listener, Opie and Anthony one day were really making fun of Sarah Jessica Parker. I mean, they were being mean. They were like calling her horse face and all that stuff.
It's terrible.
And she was in the back of a cab who had it on, and she called them to yell at them. You don't get that anywhere. And in fact, that's one of the things that Opie and Anthony said was the difference between when they worked on the radio and satellite radio. On satellite radio, their fans had to go find them. On regular radio, you could be in a cab, you could just be dialing around yourself and bump into them, be like, who are these idiots? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
that's the difference, I think, between radio and all other forms of
Audio.
audio, yeah.
So speaking of Craig, so you tweeted out today a trailer of the Craig Carton's HBO documentary Wild Card.
Wild card, yeah.
Wild Card. Is there anything that you wanted to say? It got kind of contentious there on Twitter for a little while.
Oh, I always fight with people on Twitter. First of all, embarrassing that they didn't put me in the trailer. I'm in the documentary. Put me in the trailer. Come on. So was I bothered by that? Not at all. Listen,
Considering
think
you are the producer of the show, it's kind of odd that you're not in the trailer.
Come on.
Right. It is a little.
Right.
So
Embarrassing, a little bit embarrassing.
all
Also.
right.
The documentary looks pretty good. I think just tweeting out the trailer to the documentary and the reaction I got shows exactly why he is an interesting talk show host, because I got a ton of responses. I cannot keep up with them, which is not normal. They are people that love the guy and people that hate the guy. There is very little in between. And you'll find that with most people that are good at this, right? People don't go, Howard Stern? Yeah, he's all right. No, they're like, love Howard Stern, or he's a pig. that's just how it is. And those
Interesting.
personalities tend to do well because, as they said in the Howard Stern movie Private Parts, when they did research, the people that loved Howard Stern listened to him for 2 hours a day. The people that hate Howard Stern listen to him for 3 hours a day, right?
Okay.
So I'm looking forward to the documentary, October 7th on HBO. It's all about his gambling addiction, his being found guilty in court and going to jail, and now getting out. So
Excellent. All
it's
right.
interesting.
It looks very interesting. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah,
So, as we come to the half an hour mark, what
yeah.
would you say is your very best advice for students?
My best advice for students, well, I went and got a graduate degree in communications, which I knew wasn't really going to help me find a job, but I knew what it was going to allow me to do is do some more research on my field, right? So a lot of times in classes, when you're given papers to do or projects to do, research projects, you can kind of pick your topic based on the subject of what the instructor is looking for you to do. So when I went and I knew I loved to talk radio, I tailored all of my papers and all of my projects to talk radio. I made them fit what the instructor was looking for, but what I was interested in researching, right? So that gave me a much better background in how talk radio works as far as engaging an audience, keeping an audience, why people tune in. So when you're in school, walking out with a degree, you can't just walk into a radio station or TV place and go, I have a degree, give me a job. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. But it's not a wasted time
No.
to study this stuff because you can learn a lot for what you are specifically interested. A lot of times in communications, they'll sometimes even title it radio slash TV slash film. That's how I got it. I have a master's degree in that. I don't know a thing about film or television
Right.
because when I went
What did you
there,
write your thesis on? Was it about Howard Stern or David Letterman?
my thesis was about talk radio
Okay.
and how people use talk radio as a virtual friend. This was even before, this is
Parasocial interaction.
parasocial interaction.
Yes.
This was back in 1994, before the internet and all this stuff. So it was really how people, and this was me growing up with the radio, and even as an adult living in Florida without any friends. I used the talk radio as company. I would be home. I was never alone. I had talk radio on. I felt like I knew those people that were talking to me on the radio. So that's why I was very interested in it. All those times when you were having a crap day, a crap few months in life, and that was there as not like a friend would be there for you, but there was something comforting about what was coming out of those radio speakers every day. So that's what I studied. So I would say that advice for students: try to get internships, try to reach out to people in the field whose job you would be interested in, and
Oh,
see if you
excellent advice.
can get time with them.
If anyone has any questions, please feel free to write them in the comments section. We'll take some time right now to ask questions of Al. So if you have anything that you'd like to ask Al, now's your chance.
How many people are watching this?
We have quite a few.
Don't embarrass me. I know
Listen,
this is going to rerun. I know
they
a lot
can
of people
see it.
don't.
Well, yeah, it's
So tell me
okay.
how many are live. I want to know, please.
We have 12 people live.
I'll take it. Listen,
Okay.
is that more than Izzo last week? I'm trying to beat Izzo.
You're trying to beat Izzo. I
Very
don't know.
competitive this
I
field.
can't tell you. I can't tell you my numbers. The video had a lot of views after the
Well,
fact. Izzo did a great job.
you sound like a
Yours didn't make
podcaster who's afraid to give their actual statistics out.
I can't reveal. Anyone that's watching can see how many people are live, though, Al.
This small child is asking a question here on this. Wow. Al, is
She's
there anywhere
cute.
students can do internships? That's a great question. Listen, people ruined internships because there was a time when there were many, many interns at many, many places. Then somebody sued CBS saying, I was doing work and I didn't get paid. So guess what? Whoever that person was, you ruined it for everybody, because now every place has limited internships because most internships now have to be paid. And if you know radio, they're cheap. They ain't paying people. So it
Oh,
is very difficult. It's very competitive now, right?
that,
So even at a place like WFAN, we used to have like 10 or 12 interns a semester. And it was great. Eddie Scazzeri, who ran the internship program, he would take people that seemed really qualified. He would take people that were a little off of center because he thought, listen, radio takes people, you got to be a little off to be in this field. Let's take some of those people, right? So he really took a diverse group of interns. And unfortunately, now the numbers have dwindled so much. So every place still takes interns. It's just a very competitive.
oh, and we
Michael
have
Eccles
someone here
Jr.
commenting, please bring back the boring podcast, Al.
Well, I don't know which one Ryan means. The boring podcast that I did with interviews, I've run out of people, but the boring podcast
With
I did
Paul.
where Paul and I talked about just random topics, that was a good one. But listen, there's a lot of pressure. Paul felt a lot of pressure coming up with topics. I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Paul works a real normal person's job, so he ain't
Right,
getting home till 7 o'clock at night. I want to go to bed. It just didn't
right.
work.
Well,
We
that's
had
the
our
thing.
run. Plus, sometimes when a series only runs for a little bit of time, you think how great it was when it really wasn't that great. It just ended before you wanted it to. Better to end now than for it to go on and on and go, oh my God, this is still podcast, still going on. It's terrible.
Yeah, that's the thing I think also a lot of students don't understand about podcasting. To have a podcast, it needs to have multiple episodes, and
Yes.
every one you have to
Consistent.
consistent, and you have to prep for it, and you have to
Right.
have topics and
Yeah.
it right,
Yeah. Podcast has to be like a regular show. So your podcast comes out Tuesday mornings at 9 a.m. It better be there every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Because if it's not, you're not going to have the engagement. You're not going to have the listeners there. And then the minute you make it every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., guess what? It becomes a job.
right. That's
And
right,
every job is a job.
right.
The guy who for the guy who photographs the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue sometimes says, "I can't. I got to work tomorrow." Ah, because everything becomes a job when you have to be there at a certain time.
A
This
good
Justin is quite
good,
a student. I hope
yeah,
he's getting an A.
he's doing great. What
He
advice
is doing
would you
well.
give someone who may want to be more of a show prep producer type rather than an on mic talent?
Interesting. I would find some shows, maybe even podcasts that you like and listen to, and you get a feel for what sort of things they cover and start sending them ideas. Not looking to get paid, but start sending them ideas. Listen, as a producer, that's how Tom Izzo got started, the fellow who was on here last week. He started sending me fully produced song parodies that hockey sucks, right?
Yeah,
And it was great. Now I have something that I can play on the air that didn't take me any time to do. It was funny. It fit exactly with what we were doing. He heard it on the air. He got more pumped up to start churning out stuff. And now the guy works for the radio station.
yeah. So here's a big one. So he says,
Wow.
Joe says, Al, the Boomer and Gio show did a great job during the pandemic. You all adapted to working remotely, and it appeared to be pretty seamless. Care to share any behind the scenes stories of glitches or ups and downs? And yes, bring back the boring podcast, even if it's only 30 to 45 minutes. Thanks,
uh,
Joe.
Thank you, Joe. As far as the pandemic goes,
Yeah,
in the beginning, we did not have video, right? So I think in the beginning it was very difficult because we were all in different places and none of us could see each other, which is very difficult for a multi-person talk show. I mean, you and I can see each other. We're only two people, and we'll step on each other during this. It's normal. So in the beginning, it was difficult to not have eye contact because you don't realize how much in your eyes you're saying to the other person when you finish that thought. Give a second because I got something here. So we didn't have that. So that was tough. There were technical glitches in the beginning because we were, like I said, we were Boomer, Gio, me, Jerry, Eddie, 5 different places we were. So Eddie had to take all that audio in, make sure we were all at correct volume, make sure that when you were not on, when you didn't think you were on the air, that you weren't on the air and say
Right.
something stupid, right?
So so Eddie was
So
the only one that was going into the studio, right?
yeah, Eddie was the only one going in. So, but once we were able to start using the Zoom platform and we're able to see each other on the screen, it really made things much different. And it does feel seamless now when we do it, but it did not feel seamless in the beginning. I remember I would get done with the shows and I was very upset. I'd be very angry, like, I
I
can't
know.
believe how crappy that show was, or everyone was stepping on each other, no one knew to talk. There was a even a half of a second of a delay really throws you off. So
Right.
um, yeah, that's how we did it, and that's the great thing with radio. Radio is like baseball, right? So baseball, if you have a really terrible game, there's another game tomorrow. Where football, you got to wait another week, right? So radio's like that. So if you have a crappy show today, don't have a crappy one tomorrow. Once you start putting a couple crappy shows in a row together, then you're in trouble. But if you have a problem one day, we'll get it the next day. And we were all confident, and me, Boomer, Jerry, and Eddie have worked together for 13 years. Gio for 3 years. So you do start to know how the interaction goes with each other. So it makes it a little more seamless. That's a
Um,
long-winded answer.
so Joe said, amazing. Thanks for answering. That must have been very tricky. And he's a high school teacher teaching remotely. It's very difficult. So
Yes.
I think that kind of speaks to the difference between producing a live event and editing something in post like Tom Izzo does. Because when you're live, you just have to keep going. You
Right.
don't have the chance to stop, re-record it, edit it out.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and that's also a great thing about doing something live. It's
Right.
done. There's no lingering over it.
And
And
oh, sorry, for a very last question, because it
all
relates to
right,
the question before that. Are you ever going back to the studio? Or are you going to stay in your Bradley Beach condo looking at the ocean with Whimsy, your dog?
listen, if it was up to me, I would never go back into New York City again. Didn't love New York City before the pandemic, certainly don't love New York City now, but I know we'll eventually go back in. And that'll be good too, because the shows are better when everybody is in the same room.
Right.
That's true. And there's less likely to be a problem, a technical issue, although we really haven't had any. This technology has come a really long way in a really short amount of time.
It's
I mean,
incredible.
luckily, I mean, we are lucky that the pandemic hit in the technology age that we are in right now.
Mm.
Because it really did make it very possible for people to do things,
And do things like even like this,
even like this.
even like this.
I might start fooling people and put a green screen behind me that looks like I'm in the studio.
You
And
could
I'll be
do
like,
that.
I'm here. I'm back.
So I
That's a
want
good
to,
idea.
that is a really good idea. I can help
Yeah,
you
I'll
with
do
that.
that.
So I want to thank everyone so much for watching. If you're interested in hearing from producers in 2 weeks, I have the CBS television producer of Tiki and Tyranny that will be on, which is Marlo Donahue. I'm so happy to have her. And I just want to thank you for your questions and your time. Al, thank you so much. You've always give of your time, and I really appreciate it.
Oh
I'm
yes,
sure the students appreciate it too.
anything for the children.
They're not children.
Oh, the
They're
adults.
master's degree students.
Oh, master's degree.
Yes,
Okay,
but
so
thank
older.
you. Yes, they're older. All right,
All right.
everyone. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon. Thanks, Al.
Sure.